Welcome back to MVM. Today we're going to be taking a look at the game Terraternity from Egan Mitch Games. Now, this is a game with both a societal and educational purpose. The designers were moved by the concept of global warming and sustainability. They wanted to create a game that teaches its audience about the dangers of CO2 and the possibilities of green energy. Now, they managed to do that in an educational way that is still very much a board game experience. So this is not what I would call an educational tool, although this can definitely be used for education in classrooms or just among the game table. The game itself is filled with tons of facts, which you'll see. The rulebook gives a pretty good breakdown about global warming and climate change in general, and just talks about really the benefits of green energy, which is what you're trying to do in this game. You're trying to turn the world green or get the world to switch from their fossil fuel over to different forms of green energy. You'll have solar, water, and wind plants that you can build over the course of the game. But let's talk about the game itself, because like I said, this is still a pretty meaty game experience. The game can be played in two ways, either cooperatively or competitively. If you're playing cooperatively, then you want to work together to turn 8 countries of the world green. If you're playing competitively, then you want to be the first person to turn 5 countries green. If you have 5 countries green in front of you, then you win the game. Now, this is done through just a variety of different actions, mechanics, and components that you're going to see spread out here on the board. First of all, we have a map of the world that represents all the different countries. These countries are all here in this country deck. And this country deck is based on real-world research. So it's going to tell you a little bit of information about the country. It's going to show you how much carbon fuel they produce or how much CO2 emissions they produce, and also their potential for green energy. So you'll see here that they have potential to make 4 green energy, but they're producing 6. You need to kind of bridge the gap. You need to get them to be producing more green energy than they are black energy. And we'll talk about how that works. You're also going to have a variety of resources that come out with this different country. And then, of course, the information about the country itself, which I said is all based on real world data. You can kind of see the ranking of how well each country is doing in its movement towards sustainability. Now, the energy I was talking about is produced by these energy cards. These represent the different kinds of power plants that you can build over the course of the game. Each one of these power plants is going to provide a certain amount of green energy. So that green energy is added to the green energy of the country, and you'll get your total power production for that country over the course of the game. These can be very difficult to build. They can require a lot of resources, they require a lot of workers, and they require a lot of time. We'll talk about how that works, but you're going to have this energy deck. You're also going to have a deck of action cards. These action cards will do a variety of different things, give you extra turns, bonuses to certain actions, or just generate less CO2 on your turn, or give you more green energy output. So there's just a variety of reasons you want to have these action cards. Now, what's great about this game is when you're drawing up, you're getting to choose from these different piles to build your hand. So if you're light on countries or you need more countries in front of you, you can draw country cards and etc. The last deck is the disaster deck. That's bad. The disaster deck is going to be triggered if you ever have a CO2 eruption, basically. Over the course of the game, as you produce CO2, you're going to be placing those cubes on top of this planet Earth, which is out here in the middle of the ocean. As the game progresses and you're producing more and more CO2, you're going to be stacking these cubes up higher and higher, trying to balance them until they fall. If they fall, you've created a disaster, which is bad. It means there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere. You're going to draw a disaster card. I would not consider this like a dexterity element, although it does take a bit of dexterity. It's more of a timer. The more cubes you stack up on there, eventually they're going to trigger and you're going to have to deal with disaster cards throughout the course of the game. Disaster cards can erupt anywhere on the board, and you're going to be actually using these red cubes to mark where the disasters happen. Players that control countries around that disaster zone are going to suffer. Now, of course, you're still going to have your resources. You have water, metal, minerals, fossil fuels, and money that you're going to be spending. You're going to collect these from different countries, and you're going to spend them to build power plants. Now, each particular player board, you'll notice, is a different color. It's not just the color that matters, because you're actually a different role. So it's asymmetric here. In a cooperative game, you're going to want to use these roles together in ways to maximize your ability to convert these power plants. But in a competitive game, you're just focusing on how you can benefit yourself, but also you can still give these cards to other players as some kind of benefit for yourself. Now, each one of these cards does something special. And then you've got a card that produces CO2. So whenever somebody takes one of your cards, It's a gamble. They don't know which card they're getting. So it's always a risk. Even when you draw from your own deck, you might get the one that produces CO2 and forces you to place CO2 up on your board. The rest of the player board is pretty much the same for other players. You're going to have a space where you can place your action dice. You're going to have a variety of flags, workers, power plants, and you're going to have slots to store your level up cubes, which you'll gain over the course of the game, and your skill cubes, which are these little yellow cubes. You'll earn those in special ways over the game as well. So let's talk about that. Let's actually talk about how the game is played. You're playing the game over 10 rounds. Whether you win or lose at the end of that 10 round is up to you. You can win early if you trigger the in-game condition, but if you make it all the way to 10, then you just have to total up the points basically and see who's winning. Each step along this track is going to give you a star. This is something kind of random that can happen on your turn. And these stars have a variety of different colors on the other side. So as you move onto a space, you're going to reveal that star and do what it says. It's going to have you add more CO2 to the planet. It's going to have you potentially gain a level up cube or a skill cube, or it could give you an extra die to spend on your turn. Normally you have 3 dice to spend. That could give you a third. So each player is going to do that on their turn. There's actually one more thing that could happen as you move, and we'll talk about that, because you could actually have power plants that are waiting to be built. Because on your turn, you're going to get to do 3 different actions. And these dice here are not rolled. They're not random. These are basically just action counters, so you can place them out, and you can see the order in which you took your actions. Some of the actions are pretty simple. You're going to get to draw cards from the other players and try to access their abilities. You're going to be able to trade resources with the bank, and you're going to be able to play cards from your hand. Now, action cards are special. They might give you bonuses, like I said early, but country cards are going to come in front of you and activate. Every time you place a country card in front of you, you will take one of your flags, you will find the country on the map, and you'll place that flag there, representing the fact that you now own that country. So each player will have these flags out potentially across the map. You're also going to take a black power plant and place it on that country's card. This is showing that this is still producing CO2. It has not been replaced by a green power plant. So effectively, it's producing its CO2 every round. Now, each country is going to provide a different amount of CO2. At the start of your turn, you're going to add up all the CO2 produced by all of your countries. You're going to gather those cubes and you're going to place them on top of the earth, trying not to cause a disaster to happen. These countries are valuable because you'll be able to place your workers on them in order to harvest their resources. You'll also be able to add power plants to them. So another action you can take is to play an energy card. Now, these energy cards require resources, not just from up here. They also require workers. They require either your own worker, which will have to come onto the energy card, or you'll have to hire workers from other players. You'll pay that player 1 money, and you'll take one of their workers and you'll place it on their power plant. Now, if a player doesn't have any workers left, they have to still give you one. They can't reject the hire. So they'll actually have to return one from one of their cards to give to you. But provided that you have exactly the number of workers you need on a given card, you could potentially build that. But each power plant requires a certain amount of time. For example, the solar plant requires 1 year. So I would take this and I would place it on the 1 year mark if I was the green player. Wherever I am in the game, I'd place it one space beyond me so that I can build it when I get there. So it doesn't matter, I've paid the resources, I've placed the workers, everything's ready to go, but the power plant will not build until I actually move my worker on there. Then I can actually take that power plant, replace this one with the green energy plant. This is kind of the goal of the game. Now, my country is producing green energy. It was already capable of producing 9, plus I produced 3. So that's a pretty good deal. I'm actually producing 12 green energy here, and I'm only contributing 1 CO2. The 12 green energy will overwhelm the 1 CO2, and I'm left with 11. That's actually kind of a pretty good turn. You're generally not going to produce that much excess because you'll have other countries out, but that 11 can be used to kind of offset the CO2 produced by your other countries. So let's say that you've offset most of it and you're still left with 2 green cubes. Those 2 green cubes can either be saved on your board to offset more on a later date, or they can be placed on your level track to level up your character board. Every time you hit a level, you're going to gain a yellow skill cube to come over to the skill area of your board. You can earn these skill cubes in other ways. From building specific power plants, certain countries will give them. But if you ever fill up an area with skills, you can actually trade these in for what's called a mega power plant. A mega power plant is taken from your regular section and placed up here, and then it can be built at any time. you can use a special action to just build this power plant instantly. You don't have to wait a certain amount of time. Now, every time you build a power plant, you're going to take that power plant and place it at the top of your board, and you're going to increase the global track by 1. Now, if this is a competitive game, then you don't need to really worry about the global victory track, but in a cooperative game, every power plant you can take off the board, every one of these black power plants that you're placed with a green one or colored one, is going to move you 1 space towards victory, which is what you want to do. That's kind of the goal of the game. These power plants can be very expensive, and the only real way you're going to be able to get the resources needed for them is to place your workers on these countries and generate resources over time. But you only have 10 rounds. So you kind of want to play a lot of countries, and you want to get your workers out on those countries to generate a lot of resources, or hope that maybe you have some action cards that will help generate more resources. But if you keep your workers out on those countries, they're not contributing to the building of those power plants. And other players can still come and buy those guys off of your spaces to put them on their own power plant. So you need to be really careful. You have to walk that fine line. But you can always trade resources with other people. Now, here's where there's a big difference in the cooperative versus competitive. In the cooperative, everybody wants to trade resources as best they can to push the game forward. If I'm just a few materials short of building my power plant, I want to ask everyone if they can trade with me. And you have to trade something for something, but we can generally work out a favorable trade. In a competitive game, it becomes like Settlers of Catan. I mean, you're taking bids for offers. You're trying to sell your precious materials that other people don't have to get more in return. Other players don't really want to help you because they're pushing you towards the end game. However, it could be very beneficial. You could help them make a really big trade and give them a lot of resources in exchange for very little. So looking for those trade opportunities is a huge part of that competitive experience. Now these dice, as I said, you're going to place them out. As you take your actions, you're just going to place them out on the board. Once you're done, it's going to move on to the next player. They're going to do the same thing. They're going to move 1 space on their track. They're going to reveal whatever their star is, and they're going to be taking their turn as well, generating CO2. I talked a little bit about how disasters work. Every time you cause a topple here with the CO2, whoever did it has to draw one of those disaster cards. Now this is where your flags out in the country matter. When a disaster happens, it's going to show you where on the world map you're going to trigger that disaster. This card, for example, says Heat Wave in Texas. You're going to look at how many cubes you want to gather. You're going to need to gather 2 red cubes. You're going to drop them in Texas, and the card itself kind of becomes a guide for how far you can drop them from. You're going to drop these cubes, and you're going to see where they bounce. You're going to see how far that the effect in Texas can reach. This is, again, part of their example of how the real-world disasters can impact everywhere. So you're going to see where the cube dropped, and you're going to see if it's within a card length of any one of these flags. These are the countries that are potentially affected by this disaster. So you'll see how a heat wave in Texas can affect Nigeria and even Brazil. It's going to suffer some kind of negative event to those countries. So these disasters can be really bad, especially if you've clustered up a lot of your countries in one area. A disaster that triggers in the middle of all of them can be very bad for you. They can cause you to get rid of resources. They can cause your workers to be injured and go down to the hospital. They could cause you to lose progress on your power plants and delay your power plants, all kinds of different things. So avoid them as best as possible as you're playing the game. But the gameplay is going to continue. If a disaster happens, your turn ends, but the next player will take their turn and so on and so forth until one of those in-game conditions are met. Either every player has taken their 10th turn, or if cooperatively you've built the 8 power plants, competitively you've built the 5, or if you've had 5 disasters. In cooperative mode, that's your other in-game timer. So as you're working together, you have to prevent those disasters from happening at all costs. The disaster tracker doesn't matter in a competitive game because there is no way for everyone to lose. There's always going to be a winner. So that is kind of an overview of Terraternity. Like I said, there is a lot going on in this game, but it is all educational. I mean, it's all about learning how the decisions that you make when it comes to sustainability and green energy kind of impact the whole globe. Now, there is actually another smaller version of this game included. This is called the Card Challenge. This is also available on the Kickstarter. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it is a smaller version of this game that really just is about card play. So it still kind of has the same aspects of the game, but you're losing the map and a lot of the different components, and it's turning it into a fairly simple card game that you can carry with you and again to use as an educational tool. So thank you so much for watching here today as I talked about this game. Please take a look at their Kickstarter page to see what all the final components are going to look like, and let me know in the comments below what you're most excited about, what games you've been playing lately. I'd love to hear all about it. And as always, thank you so much for watching us here at MVM. Until I see you next time, keep having fun at the table.
Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.